As we get set up, and again, it's an honor to be here today because I'm going to talk about a subject we just don't talk about, and it's called suicide. And it happens all the time. It is one of the second, as we gather here this morning and we're talking about youth, it's the second leading cause of death of our youth. Number two, but we don't talk about it, do we? How many in this room know somebody that has thought about suicide or died by suicide? Look around, folks. Look how many people have raised their hands in this room, but we don't talk about it. It does not discriminate. It does not care if you're rich, poor, white, black, whatever. It does not care. I'm going to have you to change this next one because I've got a bunch of them. I'm going to talk you through this. When I started looking at this today, and I knew that we were looking at violence because suicide is violence. Here's the numbers across Kentucky. Now look at it, 97, we spiked big time. But this is between 10 years old and 24-year-olds of the youth that are dying. Now this next one, if you can hit the next one, please. That top line I just added is suicide. In many cases, 2 and 3 times the number of deaths than of homicide. And I'm not downplaying homicides. I am very proud of the folks that are out there going after and trying to prevent homicide because you're very, very outspoken. And you have to be outspoken. You have to be in your neighborhoods. You have to be saying, I own this. But it's the same thing in suicide, and we're talking about youth suicide. Next slide, please. How big is the problem in the United States? If you can go ahead to the next one. 38,000 deaths in the United States, 950,000 people. And these are estimates because guess what? As we look across the United States, we don't have an accurate number of deaths. Many of the people, coroners and everybody else, are elected officials. And what happens is they go, do not write this down, please. Put it down there as an accident that my kid's gun just happened to go off. So we do not have an accurate picture of this, but that's over 38,000 people. And by the way, my military friend here, do you know if you're military, you're twice likely to die by suicide than your civilian counterpoint? Because of all of things. Next slide. Now, people wonder about that, but you know, that's 105 people a day dying in the United States by suicide. That's like a small plane going down every day with no survivors. And we don't talk about it, do we? We don't say a word about it. 105 people. Did those people not mean anything to us? They were throwaways? I don't think so. Next slide. Now we're talking about youth deaths in Kentucky. Total deaths, 637. And again, that's an estimate because we don't know the exact numbers because coroners are elected. But it's the second leading cause of death of our 15 to 34-year-olds. In this school year, we have already lost 2 middle kid schools in Jefferson County to suicide. We didn't talk about that, did we? This is probably brand new news to everybody in this room. 2 children, 12 years old, that died by suicide, facing things that they could not handle on their own, but did not know who to turn to. Just what you were talking about. Being able to have an adult to go to and say, I'm in trouble. Something's happening here in my life, and I don't know how to handle it. Or having that kid's friend come to an adult and sit there and say, my friend's in trouble. I'm worried about him. Why are you worried about him? Well, I think he's suicidal. Next, please. Next slide. Look at this staggering number. This is Metro Louisville over the last several years. This also sparked Louisville too because my good friend, Mr. Anthony Smith, sitting here on the front row that's doing a phenomenal job, has taken this one on too and said, no, we are going to do something. We are going to form as a community to do something. And he started putting together and asking people to come together the same way as we are looking at homicides, to look at suicide. And when he asked me that, And being involved as I've been in the last 11 years, I went back to the Suicide Prevention Resource Center in Washington, D.C., and that was one of the areas that everybody on the committee pointed, hey, that's a good resource. So I went back to those guys and worked with them for a long time, and I said, guess what we want to do? We want to put together a community-wide suicide prevention network, a safety net. Help me. Help us do that. And they said, you will be the first city in the United States to do that if that's what you guys accomplished. Please let us know how you did that, because we need to be able to tell other cities in the United States. No city in the United States has a network to protect children, young adults, our seniors, which is, if you're 65 and older, you're hugely at risk of suicide. Hugely at risk. And why? Many times what happens in that area, dad has now lost mom, dad's living with the kids, he feels like, I am a pain in my kids' butt, I need to get out of here, so I'm just going to go sit in the car and let it run in the garage, or I'm just going to go out at the barn. I'm going to go behind the garage because I'm a burden to my kids and I don't want to be a burden. So he looks at it that he's doing them a favor. I can tell you, by having lost a son to suicide, it will impact you for the rest of your days. Next slide. College students. This is the one that got me, because that's when my son died, was in college. We were not aware until several days after his death that on a college campus, it is the second leading cause of death on our college campuses. Number 2. How many people go to college to sit there and say, boy, this is great. My freshman year, I'm going to college, and sometime in that 4 years, I'm going to die by suicide. None of them did. But they ended up getting hit with something they were not prepared to deal with, and that's called depression. They get hit smack straight on, and when we talk about talking with children, talk to them about depression. Warn them about depression. Talk to them about mental health. So many times in that world of mental health, we don't talk to our kids, we don't talk to anybody about mental health. We're afraid of that word, mental health, mental health, mental health. It's okay. But guess what? We used to do the same thing with physical health. I grew up out in Pleasure Ridge Park. Waverly Hills, you know what we used to do with people that we didn't understand health-wise? We locked them up. We put them away in places. Years ago, when we also talked about, for example, breast cancer, we didn't say that word years ago. We sat there and we encouraged the woman to look more like a woman. But it wasn't until people stood up and said, no, I do not want my mom, my sister, my friend, anybody dying of breast cancer. What can we do to stop this? And the organization said simply, we need money to help fight this, and we need people to help educate. And the people took to the streets. They went out and they said, it's not acceptable for somebody, my sister, my mom, or anybody else. And today, that's on a huge decline. We have huge awareness. I, as a husband, remind my wife, have you had your breast exam? Have you? I encourage her for good health. She encourages me for good health. We have come a long way since those days, and those days were not long ago. Same thing with AIDS. Years ago, we would not talk about AIDS because we said, those people have AIDS. It doesn't hit us. But it wasn't until a young child by the name of what? Ryan White. And the whole country stopped and said, oh my God, it affects everybody. And we changed. Michael Jackson brought it to the forefront. We changed when we became educated and said, it is in my neighborhood. It is affecting my family. It is affecting my friends. It is affecting the people I go to church with. It is, and it's the same thing with depression and suicide. As we look around, it is the exact same thing, a subject that we're so afraid to talk about, but we've got to. Next slide. 77 deaths. Youth deaths under 18 in Kentucky. Go ahead to the next one because this is staggering too. The Center for Disease Control every odd year, does a survey of our youth in Kentucky. Jefferson County Public Schools does their own. They do not participate in this. And I'm not downing JCPS because I'm going to brag on them here in a minute because they are a model for good suicide prevention. But look at this. 10.9%, 1 out of every 10 kids attempted suicide. Nationally, that number is 6.3. Hey, we're winning. We're leading. Boy, we're number one. Huh? We love being number one. Next slide. 4.6 had to be hospitalized or saw a doctor. The national level, a little less than 2%. We're leading in that category too. Next slide. This is the one that staggers me. Of our kids sitting in classrooms today, 15% of them have a plan to commit suicide. They've already thought about it. They have a plan. And if they don't have a plan, guess what? They can go to the internet, they can log on, and they can find a way to commit suicide. There's plenty of information out there. But they have a plan. They are facing things that they don't understand. And many of that is the same thing as we were talking about. Bullying. Bullying is at an all-time high. Go ahead to the next slide. Because I know, and this is the same thing basically. They may have planned. Next one. Now we are making some changes in some areas because again what we did, and this is about the Jefferson County Public Schools. In 2010, and as we were talking about, my wife and I had a complete career change, especially her. We lost our son, a Western Kentucky basketball player, in 2002 to suicide. He was, his first year, he was a freshman, walk-on. And did phenomenal. Grades were great, everything else. Coach came to him and said, guess what? I'm giving you a scholarship. And he was ecstatic. He launched, as you can imagine, getting a scholarship to Western Kentucky University to play basketball. That's every kid's dream here in Kentucky, right? For most part. Well, that same day, he came down in a pickup game on his foot and injured it, and it never would heal. He went through the whole season. And it never, ever healed correctly. They went to the NCAAs. They came back. At the end of that, the coach came to him and said, Nathan, I told you needed to be maintenance-free. Your grades are dropping. I don't know what's going on with your son, but I've got to let you go off the team. 5 weeks later, he died by suicide the night his girlfriend broke up with him. We were not made aware of that. Nathan is my stepson, but I don't look at him. He's my son. We get a phone call on Monday from his biological dad in Western Kentucky. It said, you don't know this, but Nathan was released from the team 5 weeks ago, and he was supposed to be house on Sunday, and we can't find him. Both my wife and my heart went right to the floor because I thought, oh my God, how devastated he is. He has to just be overwhelmed with what has impacted his life. So we went looking all through Louisville. We looked in his old neighborhood. We called his friends and everything. And then about at 6:30 that night, we get a phone call from his dad. And he said, we're going to go look in the dorm. And they called us back, and they had found him. As you can imagine, we were devastated. And at the church, I'll never forget the church service because there was a lot of big kids, there were every athlete at Western Kentucky University filled our church. And I'll never forget it. I mean, as we stood there, and the coach came up to me and he said, I am so sorry. You know, I didn't know what to do to help Nathan because I saw him struggling. So I released him from the team because I wanted to get his attention. My plan was to bring him back in the fall. Coach got his attention. Got his attention big time. You know, again, when a kid in school loses an activity, That's huge. That is absolutely huge to that kid. He's worked hard to get to that point. He looks at that coach as more than a mentor. You know, we talk about manning up, and I totally agree with that, but coaches forget how big of a man they are in that kid's life and how big of a responsibility they have to that life. And I'm not putting coaches down or anything else, but again, looking at where that child is in that thinking process, how they feel about themselves, how they see themselves within that community, their community. All of a sudden, Nathan was removed from his community. He was taken, put in another dorm. He could not allow to practice or do anything else. And in fact, we were not even aware that he was off the team. The Saturday before his death, came to the house. We had a birthday party for him. And guess what we did? We had basketball plates, basketball theme, everything. Western Kentucky had no idea he was off the team. We even reinforced the importance of being a basketball player, not knowing, but thinking we were doing the right thing. And in fact, about 6 months ago, his girlfriend at that time that still struggles said, you know, that day that we came to your house, Nathan wanted to tell you, but I talked him out of it. Folks, I can tell you, don't keep anything like that a secret. Do not. Tell your kids, don't keep it a secret. Tell the people you love around you, don't keep it a secret. If somebody is struggling, be there. Be their mentor. Go sit beside them. Talk to them. How are you doing? I know you've got to be devastated. Next slide. You talk about bullying, and bullying is a very difficult one. And it's happening. It's happening. Jefferson County School, public school, private schools are doing their best. What happens is a lot of times it takes place not only on the playground, but they've got a lot of times on buses. They've got a lot of transportation time. They also, the old internet. The internet is a wonderful way to bully somebody. Go ahead to that next slide, because I want to show you. Roll on through, because I know it. Rachel Nedlett, her dad and I are good friends. She died about 5 years ago in Bullitt County. She was bullied, and I love her dad, and he knows today. You know what he told us, you know, when she brought it to him, he said, Dad, look at these texts. And what did he say? What men say all the time. Suck it up. Suck it up. Just suck it up. She couldn't suck it up. She couldn't suck it up. She couldn't get away from it, and she ended up ending her life. 6 months later, her best friend ended her life. And 6 months after that, almost on Rachel's death, the other girl, best friend, ended her life. We didn't realize that we needed to talk to them. Next slide. %. 20% of the kids in school today say across the United States they're being bullied. Go ahead to this next one, because this is my favorite. And I thought about this one. You know, we talk about mental health. How many have seen The Christmas Story? Great movie, isn't it? Love it. You got Scut, Frocus, oh, Mr. Green Teeth, you know, he comes down through there, oh yeah. And then what happens? Ralphie finally gets so PO'd. He lays into him, doesn't he? Wails on him. Just wails on him. But let's look at it, what really happened right then. Ralphie lost it. Remember that all of a sudden all these kids were coming up trying to talk Ralphie out of it? Even his mother tried to talk Ralphie out of it. And what was Ralphie doing? He was going to get ruckus. He didn't care. I don't care. He lost it. If he had a mental health meter, he went from good mental health to no mental health. He lost it. How many times does that happen to our kids when they're being bullied? Whether they acted out in a homicide or a suicide. Their mental health meter, on every day we see it goes from here to zero. The tank is empty. It goes to very, very bad mental health. You know, we're proud of Ralphie for standing up for the bully. But then when I looked at all of that on a national level, the violence we're seeing on campuses today, on high schools, almost every one of them are directly related to those kids being bullied. And they finally responded. The other thing is, did you know that every serial killer in the United States was bullied through his elementary, middle, and high school years? I didn't know that. I went online and found that, and that staggered me. If we don't stop it, if we were saying, if we don't stop it, it will have an impact on us. Now, I know I'm running out of time, but I want to tell you, now that I've set the stage, go ahead to the next one. See, the bully and the bullier are both at risk of suicides. For people that don't look like us, or we don't think they look like us, those folks are at a higher risk of suicide because we love putting them down. We do it in comedy, we do it on television, we do it every which way, shape, and form. We love putting down people that we think don't look like us. But it has a direct impact on those, on each and every one of us. My goal for suicide prevention is that you go home when God calls you home, not before. I want you here for a long, long time. I want you happy. I want you to have that family. I want you to live a productive life. Next slide. And again, when we're talking about suicide, what we're talking about, 80% is depression. Undiagnosed depression. Depression that we all face from time to time. We all suffer from it. Some days we have the blue days, and sometimes we're able to shake it off. But there's also times, it's like the flu. You know, you get the flu sometimes, you're okay. You can get in bed and get over it yourself. But then all of a sudden, if you get into severe flu, you need help. You need somebody to assist you. You need somebody to bring you that chicken noodle soup. You need somebody to take you to the doctor if it gets so severe. That's what happens in depression. That depression keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and those blinders of depression get you focusing on the pain that you're in until you finally cannot take it any longer and you just want the pain to end. Most people are not looking that they're going to die. They just want this pain to end. They're sick of it. They're tired of it. To face that, that's what they're facing. Next one. That young man doesn't look depressed, does he? He wasn't. They were playing basketball in 2001. If you happen to notice the seats, if you're a Kentucky fan, well, Western Kentucky beat your butt that day. Sorry. And the year before, Western beat Louisville on their home court. Great group of kids. Little would we know, that was on the front page of the Courier-Journal when Western beat them. Little would we know that a short 6 months later, that smiling face would no longer be with us. That the pain and everything else that he was up against, that he could not manage on his own, and the schools at that time, everybody else, we were not prepared. Because nobody ever talked about depression. His mom kept asking him, "Are you okay?" All year long, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, Mom, sure, I'm fine, Mom. I'm okay. But he wasn't okay. He wasn't okay. He was a kid that everybody went to say, "Hey, here's my problems." But he wasn't able to say, "Here's my problem." Next slide. 5% of our adolescents suffer from depression. But we don't talk about depression. It's interesting because we do, and we finally gotten to the point of talking about don't smoke, look both ways walking in the street, watch out for this, watch out for that. But we don't talk about depression. We don't warn our kids about depression. We don't talk about mental health at all. And we know that 5% of the kids today suffer from depression. And depression and suicide are directly related. They're directly linked. Next one. Now, We teach a course called QPR. There's other courses that are that we can teach in suicide prevention. It takes about 90 minutes. I will go anywhere, and as one guy said, go free. I am free. You call, I'm there. But we teach courses in suicide prevention. Now I'm going to brag on Jefferson County school systems because when we got the law in place in 2010, they took it on themselves to put in good programs within the schools. Every teacher gets 2 hours of training every year in suicide prevention. Now that doesn't sound like much, does it? Doesn't take long. But guess what? For the people in the clinical world that work in suicide prevention, they get 2.5 hours during their whole time in school. And that is for the people that are in the community. And I'm not putting them down because they're doing everything that's required. But if you worked in the crisis center for 7 counties, you have to have 60 hours of training just to work the crisis line. And that crisis line is busy. In Jefferson County alone, 7 counties takes 20,000 suicide-related calls every year. That's just from Jefferson County. 20,000. Again, it's something we don't talk about. Next slide. What I'm going to tell you real quick, if you think you know somebody that's in trouble, ask them. There's an old myth that if you bring up the subject of suicide, you're going to put a thought in somebody's head. I can tell you, you're not going to put a thought in somebody's head. And the easiest way to ask somebody is if I looked at you and said, have you thought about laying down and not waking up? And if you said yes, then I know exactly where you're at. If you said no, and he responded, well, Steve, why would you ask me a question like that? It'd be very easy to answer, because I care. I know you've been going through stuff in your life right now, and everything just seems to be upside down for you. And the only thing I asked you that question is because I care. And I am so glad that life is great right now. But if you ever did get to the point of feeling like I can't wake up in the morning, tell me. Please tell me. Please talk to me. Folks, you've got to have that conversation with your husbands, with your spouses, with your boyfriends, girlfriends, significant others, your children, and everybody else. Is if you have ever felt or feeling like you cannot wake up in the morning, then tell me. Talk to me. You know, we talked about warning signs. Nathan put off a ton of warning signs. You know, when somebody's giving things away, when they feel like a burden. Nathan told his girlfriend, I don't want to be a financial burden to Mom and Steve. I've lost the scholarship. You know what I would give to have that conversation with him? You could have everything I own and then some. Just to have that one opportunity to let him know he was not a financial burden to us. No child out there is a financial burden. They are not a burden. I think it was him talking about gifts from God. They are a gift. A very, very precious gift. And there are gifts. Every time that I talk to the girlfriend and every warning sign that we talk about giving things away, losing a position on a team, a cherished teacher, a cherished friend, all of that lit up on Nathan's charts. At that point in time, we were not aware of those warning signs because, again, nobody talked to us about mental health. Nobody talked to us about depression. Nobody. But I'm here today to talk about depression. I'm talking about mental health. I'm talking about good things that we can do to help each other stay alive. Next. Again, direct verbal cues, and I'll go through these very quickly, because if you hear somebody and don't blow them off and think, well, they're just trying to get attention. Guess what? You're right. They are trying to get attention. They are in a need of help. It's there on their mind. They are facing something that they don't know, and I can tell you what, folks, Be careful how you treat it. I had a scout leader. I've been trying to get suicide prevention into scouting and not been very lucky, because I had one guy tell me, well, our kids are good kids. They don't do that. I got news for him. 3 days after he told us that, we lost a scout to suicide. But I asked him, I said, if a kid comes to you and say, I'm not going to be here next week. Well, why not? Because I'm going to end my life. What would you do? And he told me, oh, that's easy. I would just tell his dad. Well, what if it's his dad has molested that child and that's the reason? So you never know why a kid has gotten to the point where the kid's at. The other thing is if you suspect a loved one of yours is thinking about suicide, if you have a gun in the house, lock it up. I'm not advocating gun anything other than if they have access to the means, and that's what happens. Nathan, his final act of self-medication, he self-medicated with a gun to the head. If they have access to the means, limit the access to the means. 80% of the young people that die in Kentucky died by a family member's gun. Access to the means. The kids didn't have a gun. They had access. And parents, let me tell you something else. If you think you have a secret hiding place in your house, you are sadly wrong. They know everything about what you have and what you don't have and where your secret hiding place is. You know, when you're not there, kids know. So you think, okay, well, I'm just going to take the gun from where it normally is going to be and I'm going to hide it over here. They know everything about you and then some. Anyhow, what I want to do is I'm going to run down to the last one because I've said enough. Again, what I want to do is go ahead. And what I want to do is I want to offer my services as to talk about suicide and teach you what to do. We have a crisis line, 1-800-273-TALK. If you know somebody or afraid that somebody that you know, your loved one's in crisis, call that number and say, here I am, I'm worried about my friend, what can I do to help him? 1-800-273-TALK. They will answer it, more than likely here in Louisville in 7 counties, but it is a hugely important number because then they can talk to you and say, here's what to do to help your friend. Here's what I can do to help your friend. Don't leave your friend. Don't judge your friend. Don't tell your friend you're going to fix the problem because you don't know what the problem really is. Be a good listener. Don't judge. Love on them. Let them know that you care, that you're always there. Stay beside them if you think they are, and then seek help by calling simply 1-800-273-TALK. The other thing I want to do is, next slide, is, and Anthony doesn't know this, but that beautiful face right there. If you would like suicide prevention training, just go online. It's real easy to do. Website's louisvilleky.gov, and Department of Safe Neighborhoods, there's a little form right there that you can fill out and put in there that you want suicide prevention training. And I will be more than happy to work with you, with your group or anybody else, and supply other people to come to your location, your church, your school, your youth organization. Because again, I'll leave you with this. If you work with youth and a kid comes into your facility and says, I'm thinking about killing myself, do you have a plan? Do the people that work for you have a plan? See, that's what we asked in the school systems. So our school systems across the state know what to do if there was a gun in the school or if there's weather-related incidents or anything else. And we asked that question. If a kid comes to a teacher's desk and says, I'm thinking about ending my life, what's your plan? And they went, we don't have one. That was in 2010, 2013. They all have a plan. Thank you.
I can't let you go. I have too many follow-up questions. You said something, suicide is violence. That's something I say all the time, and I get that really strange look on people's faces like, no, it's not. Help me. What do I say to them when they say it's not violence, that suicide is not violence?
Well, but when you look at it, that act of violence, whether it's internally acted out or externally, it is violence. We are not programmed to do anything like that. On a given day, in fact, in most days, people won't just pull out a gun and shoot each other. There is stuff that's happening there, and again, that mental health meter, if we had a mental health meter on them right there, it would go boink. It would be easy to recognize and going, hey, he's in trouble, because now he's in that Ralphie zone. I'm getting even, or I'm getting out. So I'm acting that violence back towards me, or I'm going to act it out towards you, or, and sometimes both. I'm going to take you, and then I'm going to take me. And I've already made up my mind because my meter's done. My tank's empty. I'm not in a good mental health mode anymore, and I'm like Ralphie. I no longer care. I am going to get even. I'm going to channel that somewhere. And that's what we've got to safeguard against. That's what we have to look out for. That's the guys that when they see them getting to that point, that's when we, unfortunately, the only time that many times when it happens, we end up calling the police. And the police have to only respond one way. They've got to protect themselves. If there's a gun in play, then they have to protect themselves. You know, and that's why we're looking at, and again, with Louisville, we've got the Louisville Suicide Prevention Group that Anthony's helping form, and there's others that are involved in that we want to put that whole total package together. Because again, as we look at mental health around our community, there's no shame in mental health. None. We all suffer from it, you know, so there's no shame. Another question?
Yeah. Wait, we got a question from the audience? Oh.
Because that child did not have a friend and he was feeling ill, asking, hey, why do you come here? You have no friends. These kind of clues you have to be able to catch and understand. Because the kid is feeling lost in his life and he doesn't know how to say.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to make the point that the connection between self-violence and violence towards others, that the data is between 30-40% of domestic violence abusers are seriously, 30-40% of the domestic violence abusers are seriously suicidal. And so there is a direct correlation between violence towards others and violence towards self. That often violence towards others is an expression of that violence felt towards self. So that's another point to make when people say, why do you consider suicide even relevant to the
Right.
discussion? Because it's none of that.
I'm also going to say that even if you don't know the young person intimately, right, you're not the regular in their life, and you pick up on the hints, you know, they might not say it, but you know, they might just look like something's going wrong. Don't be afraid to say it to them, say something to them, because what that conversation might do is it might spur them to go talk to somebody that they do know. You know, it wasn't a suicide situation, but a bad domestic violence situation happened like that. I've had a couple of situations happen like that where a young person came to me because they were talking to someone else, and I was able to help them get it up.
And he brings up a good point, because if you can't ask the question, and that's okay, there's no shame in that, but find somebody that can. Because again, you don't want to ask the question if I'm looking at you and thinking, man, I know you've had some bad days. You're not thinking about doing something stupid like suicide, are you? Well, I just told him I don't want to know. I've already told him what I think of him. No, I would sit there and ask him again, have you thought about laying down and not waking up? You know, to find out what's really going on in his life. So if you can't do that, find somebody that can. Tell another friend that says, hey, I got a buddy that I'm worried about, or a child I'm worried about. Will you talk to them? Will you allow them to talk to you? Because again, that good communication tool, allowing that child to open up and feel safe. And many of them don't feel safe. I can't tell you the number of times of working with the Jefferson County Public School systems, and we're talking about, you were talking earlier about the large number of kids that do not have a permanent address, so they're marked down there as homeless. The number of times our counselors, and when I was in school years ago, the counselor meant an educational counselor. Today they are mental health counselors. They are working with children. But the stories of like this one second grader standing in a garbage can. And the counselor went and talked to the kids, and he said, well, my mom says I'm nothing but trash. And he went and stood in one of those garbage cans. And it was his self-worth. You know, that was an 8th grader. When you talk about bullying, my sister-in-law teaches in the Jeffersonville school system. Last year, first day of school, she teaches first graders. She heard a commotion in the bathroom. You know, they have those bathrooms in the schools where the first graders are. She heard this commotion, went in. There was 2 first graders holding another first grader's head in the toilet. First grade. Took them to the principal's office. Parents were called. Parents came. Parent number 1 with the kid in the toilet, very upset. You'd probably be upset too if it was your kids in the toilet, right? Absolutely. The other 2 sets of parents were upset also. They were upset because their kids were going to be suspended for a few days doing what they did, an act of bullying. The parents didn't see it as an act of bullying. They said, that was just boys being boys. Boys being boys. Hey, I'm going to hold your head in the toilet because I'm just a boy being boys. Doesn't fly. And how would those parents feel if it was their child's head in that toilet? So we don't think about that. We don't talk about that. You know, instead we take that, well, they don't look like me. My kid's a good kid, wouldn't do that. No, basically all of our kids are good kids. But just like Nathan, great mental health meter up here one day, and all of a sudden, at 11:30 on a Saturday night, the mental health meter went to here. And when that meter is down to there, good things are not going to happen.
One last question. 5% of teenagers are depressed. I hate to tell you this, but there's new reports saying 10%. It just came out. This number blows my mind. That means there's an army of depressed teenagers in America. A vast army. I mean, 70 million, so 5, it's unbelievable. So the number one, they obviously don't have the meter on their head. We have to ascertain where their meter is. Is that the number one way of prevention?
And not be afraid to do something about it. Not be afraid, if your arm was hurt, what would we do? Immediately, if you are in any physical anything, as a mom or a dad, what do we do when I was a kid, Mom would go, honey, you've got a fever. I'm going to take you to the doctor. And then as we progress down the years, Mom would buy the thermometer. She would have, now she's...
So check your mental health temperature.
But we're always looking for how do we physically, health-wise, we've got Band-Aids in the house. We have all of the other stuff. If it's beyond what we can handle, very quickly we get to the doctor. When we sit there and start looking at depression, many times we just go, come on, son. Suck it up. It's just the blues,
Yeah, doesn't work, does it?
Dad, I can't suck it up, and you just told me you don't care. By your answer, Dad, you just said, deal with it, son, the best that you can. And sadly, how some of those kids, daughters and sons, will deal with it, their parents will find out 2 or 3 days after that death of standing there and having to go in and pick out a coffin. That is one of the most hardest things that you'll have to do, is go in and pick out your kid's coffin. And I pray that nobody in this room ever has that.
Well, more people like you, I'm sure we won't have to.
And that man right there in the front row, help me.
Thank you so much. I could, my experience in my research in the organization, the correlation between violence and mental health is much, 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 much higher than what people perceive, which is drugs and substance abuse and violence. So I think you're right. There's a huge misconception out there. I mean, I could tell from today's crowd that there's no misconception here.